Hello and welcome to another edition of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Craig Newmark, founder of Craigslist and major philanthropist who has supported several journalism schools and numerous other causes. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. We are so glad that you're with us today. Thank you for everyone who's watching on replay. Thank you for the Newmark School of Journalism at CUNY. We're live on their Twitter account. We're live on Craig's Twitter account. Please like, please comment, please share, please retweet. Let everyone know this is going to be a fascinating discussion. First off, we want to give you a little teaser of what's to come in today's show. This week on Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along, Craig Newmark, founder of Craigslist and major philanthropist. Craig has supported the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, Columbia School of Journalism, Berkeley School of Journalism, the Poynter Institute, Mother Jones, ProPublica, the Journalism Trust Initiative, and many other causes. Craig is particularly concerned with journalism ethics, bothsidesism, and disinformation. He has established the Craig Newmark Center for Ethics and Leadership at Poynter and the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism Ethics and Security at Columbia University, among other initiatives. This week's edition of the Sunday New York Times also features the print-only New York Times for Kids. Shh, it's the secrets issue. Their editor's note on the cover: this section should not be read by grown-ups. We will also continue our look at the front pages from this week. As of Thursday, March 24th, the New York Times has had a record 29 consecutive banner headlines on a single topic: Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Every week, we review the print edition of the Sunday New York Times, taking audience questions and interviewing special guests. The show is produced by Digimentors. We produce high-quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting, training, and workshops. Sree Srinivasan is our host. I am the executive producer, Neil Parekh. Our production team includes Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Again, Craig Newmark is our guest. Live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. We are thrilled to have Craig Newmark as our guest this week. Let's take a look at who's watching, who's joining us so far. My mom is joining from Hastings-on-Hudson. Welcome back to home. She was in Tampa, Florida for the winter. We have Miriam Berkeley watching from Hell's Kitchen, New York. Welcome, Miriam. Doug Levy, one of our West Coast guests, waking up early to catch Craig Newmark. Patricia Freudenberg watching from Long Island, New York. We have our first international guest, Gunther Baylor. And with that, let's bring on Sree Srinivasan, our host. Sree, good morning.
Good morning, and hello to our friends in Austria. So great to be here with all of you. This is 8:30 a.m. Sundays. We do the New York Times Read Along. We also read other papers, depending on who our guests are, and we can love to continue to do that with newspapers around the world. Welcome, everybody. You're going to meet Craig Newmark in just a few minutes. We have so many great guests watching with us. Let's say hello to Amy from Connecticut. Diane is watching from sunny Margate, New Jersey. Jonathan is watching from Washington, D.C. He's been tuning in every single episode from the East Village, but here he is. This is a sign about how the pandemic has changed when Jonathan's willing to travel. That tells you there's something else that's happening. We're in a different stage. Here's Samir watching from Toronto. Samir runs a great social media tool called Tweepsmap, which I use. Makrand is watching and says namaste from New York, and the Ukrainian village, church, and restaurant. And can't wait for Craig. And Craig will be here in just a minute. Ted is watching from Washington, D.C. Carla Baranakis, who's on our team, is watching from Weehawken, New Jersey, not far from Morristown, New Jersey, and even closer to Jersey City, home of St. Peter's Peacocks. And here's David K. Johnston, former guest on this show and one of our dear friends, watching live with us as well. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us about your Sunday. Some of you are already towards the end of your Sunday. What you're thinking about, what you're thinking about with the war, with the pandemic. We'll get to talk about all of that because we're going to talk about the newspaper. I'm going to just show you very quickly some of the front pages of the paper before we bring in Craig. So let's go right to it. Here you can see the front section is rallying allies. Biden says Putin cannot remain in power. Signs of persistent counterattack near Kiev, and fiery statement after visiting refugees. So this is the front page. We will be talking about this and revisiting this with Craig in a few minutes. Election texts shine new light on clout held by Justice's wife. The New York Times asked an important question. What did Justice Thomas know, and when did he know it? The question you normally ask politicians, not Supreme Court judges or justices. Here is streaming studios storm the Oscars with Best Picture in reach. And you know that tonight is the Oscars. So if you have questions or comments about the Oscars, please do jump in. We're going to glance at the other front sections, other front pages. Here's real estate, patterns of inclusion, discovering the power of Sheila Bridges' Harlem Wallpaper Company, and this is by Veronica Chambers, who's been a guest on our show in the past. Here's the Metropolitan section, which is a paper, a printed section that you wouldn't see even if you subscribe to the print paper if you don't live in the tri-state area. Students held a gangster night. Some people saw it as racist. And the Sunday Review cover is Watch This Space. Ross Douthat traces the decline of cinema as a communal and cultural force and charts a path to recovery. In my newsletter a few weeks ago, which you can find at Substack, sreenet.substack.com, I took on Mr. Douthat's political commentary. I used to be a fan. I am not one anymore. Here is the New York Times Kids section. This section should not be read by grown-ups, we've been told. And there's always lots of fun things to read in here. This is a print special. One of the things the reason we do this show is because we love print and we want to see it continue to survive, not just at the New York Times, but in all media. Here's Sunday Styles, scooping up Hollywood. Jay Penske has been on a showbiz buying spree, says Catherine Rosman, who has been a guest on this show. So lots of ties here to our show. The New York Times Magazine cover is Citizens of Kiev. What a stunning picture here. Photographs and text by C.J. Chivers. Photographs are by Alexander Chekmenev and text by C.J. Chivers. Chris Chivers was a Marine before he joined the New York Times, before he came to Columbia Journalism School, where he studied and learned so much, and we've watched his career flourish. The Times Style magazine is the design issue, a place to make art where creativity lives, works, and rests, from LA to the German countryside. So this is like a global design issue. The Arts and Leisure cover is On the Edge. To see American art in 2022, Whitney Biennial curators went to the US-Mexico border. And this is by Siddhartha Mitter, who is a fantastic writer and good friend. And the final two sections we're going to look at here is the book review. French Braid by Ann Tyler is reviewed. And the Sunday Business cover is, flip it over, donate here to solve a murder. Philanthropists look to fund police searches of DNA databases. And one of the things that we will talk to Craig about is his philanthropy. He's done so many great projects that he's supporting. Ying's watching from Hong Kong. I want to tell everybody before we start that the way I know that the city has changed and the pandemic has changed is how we're able to see the fact that we are now in a time when we can go out to events. So I went on Friday night to see my dear friend Liza Donnelly, New Yorker cartoonist, host a book launch for her new book, Very Funny Ladies, New Yorker's Women Cartoonists. And this is a terrific book and an event at the 92nd Street Y. And we got to see Liza in a almost fully masked audience. We were able to listen to her and some great other women cartoonists, including Emily Flake, Ross Chatz, and also Amy Huang. So it was a great event, but I want to tie this to our talk about Craig Newmark by showing you a picture of Liza Donnelly made a cartoon of our friend Craig when he spoke with me at the last time I interviewed him. There he is. Trustworthy press is the immune system of democracy, says Craig. This is in 2016 at Social Media Weekend, my flagship event. It was 2 years before this venue that we were at CUNY Journalism School would be named for Craig Newmark himself. So that was a nice moment. We had a nice big crowd of people who got to talk about and understand social media. So we're going to show you a quick picture from that before we bring you Craig in person. Here is that event, and you can see a big crowd there. And this was the conversation I had with him. And here is the crowd. You can see Jeff Jarvis in there, Ali Velshi. You can see Liza Donnelly. You can see Patricia Kitchen and so many of our friends. I see Linda Bernstein and Liza, so many other folks in there, Dave Beard. So this is our New York Times read-along family and so much more, the Social Media Weekend family. So with that, I think we're ready to bring on Craig in real life. Let's tell you all about Craig. He is the founder of Craigslist. He's a major philanthropist who's supported the Newmark School of Journalism, the Columbia Journalism School, Poynter Institute, Mother Jones, ProPublica, Reporters Without Borders, the Reporters Without Borders Trust Initiative, and so many other causes, including working with teachers and veterans and so many other things. Please welcome everybody, Craig Newmark.
Hey, folks, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I am so glad to see you. Glad you're here with us. If you wouldn't mind, I want to hear how the last 2 years have treated you.
I've been mostly at home doing lots of work, mostly mediated by Zoom or Meet. It's been pretty productive, moving ahead in a lot of areas. I've decided I do need to step up in the area of cybersecurity because there's a lot of areas where philanthropists need to fund private efforts, private non-commercial efforts, helping people protect the country and helping people get really good careers in cybersecurity. That's been the big development, and there will be some major announcements coming soon.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Cybersecurity is even more important now with this war going on. We know the Russians are targeting not just Ukrainian efforts, but and installations and vital infrastructure, but also in NATO and other parts of the West. And tell us about your Sunday routine. Are you a morning person? I know you're a bird watcher, so that means you have to be a morning person, right?
I'm a morning person as dictated by Mrs. Newmark. And now I consider it a pleasure to be in bed by 9. However, being a morning person, as you say, even in New York City, and I'm in Greenwich Village, this morning I was listening to birds singing, specifically cardinals and blue jays, robins, and mourning doves. So that's actually a serious pleasure.
And you've had to close your window for us so that we can hear you better, but you're missing those birds. So thank you for making that sacrifice this morning. How did you get into bird watching?
I have no idea what happened, but suddenly, long ago when I lived in Detroit, I got interested in the wildlife that crossed the boundary into the natural world. And I just kept doing it more and more. Now I get involved in pigeon rescue and related areas, even though the pigeons here have gotten very aggressive. And if we don't feed them, they start making menacing sounds.
Okay. Tell us about your relationship to New York City, and then we'll use that as a transition to talk about the New York Times and news in general.
Well, in New York, this is the center of the country, which is the center of gravity for my family, my wife's family, for the philanthropic organizations that I support. Also, moving to New York has been very good for my health. I've lost about 25 pounds, which is a continuous struggle since on one part I practice the seafood diet. Also, I don't exercise, but as it turns out, going up and down subway stairs is a pretty good exercise.
Yes, and we've got people watching from all over the world. We'll say hi to Deborah, who's watching from Fort Lauderdale. Here's Ken watching from Cedar Rapids in Iowa. Debbie's watching from Cherry Blossom, DC. We know, of course, this is cherry blossom season. Paula Kiger on our team watching from Tallahassee. By the way, when I name these cities, Craig, if you have any memory or something you want to say about any of those places, please jump in. And here's Mary's. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm thinking of someone from the East Village in the, at a place which serves Ukrainian food, reminding me that blintzes and potato pancakes would be good today.
Yes, they would. Here's Mary C. Curtis, who has been a guest on the show and a dear friend. She's a roll call columnist, and she's on the board of the Anne O'Hare McCormick Scholarships, which awards scholarship to female students at schools and bears his name. So that is great. Here's David K. Johnston watching from Rochester, New York. Folks, you can find our archived interviews with folks like Mary C. Curtis, David K. Johnston in our YouTube playlist, or just go to digimentors.group and you'll see a New York Times read along button. Click on that and you'll be able to see it. There's Therese watching from Yonkers. She and I were at the Liza Donnelly event. Here's Andrew Revkin, another great former guest that he's watching, and he says he's talking about the 29 straight days of banner headlines. There is, of course, banner headlines today and yesterday as well. Roberta is watching from Richmond, Virginia, and great to have her here. Chris Gorman's watching from the Upper East Side. Linda from sunny Long Island. And here is Anusha, who is at the Columbia Journalism School, watching from Short Hills. So let's give a shout out to the various journalism schools you've supported. You've got a major initiative at Columbia. Can you talk about that?
At Columbia, the deal is that, well, I've had my concerns about journalism ethics ever since in Sunday school, Mr. and Mrs. Levin told me that bearing false witness is bad, specifically citing the ninth commandment. So I started getting interested way back then in high school, and that was 60 years ago. In high school history, Mr. Shulsky helped me understand that a trustworthy press is the immune system of democracy, as Lisa Donnelly captured in that cartoon she did. The deal is we rely on newspapers and so on, calling out problems with journalism, because we need a really trustworthy press, one which is vigorous and challenging, to preserve our country, to preserve our democracy. And there are people who are asking what happened in 2016, and has the press learned from that? Has a pretty good essay on that.
Okay, thank you. Makran says that the New York Times totally tweets different print and online headlines, and that's partly because I'm sure the length of the headlines, but also the teams that are doing the online stories and the print stories aren't the same always. The overlap isn't 100%, so that's one of the reasons. And let's talk now about what you're doing at the Newmark School of Journalism. When we met and we were at that event at Social Media Weekend, it was still the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Now it's the Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. Tell us about that.
Well, the theme is that, again, I'm not all that smart. Journalism is hard, so I should fund centers of expertise in journalism and journalism ethics, and then they can speak for these issues much better than I can. At the Columbia Journalism School, Zeynep Turfetchi runs has the Newmark Chair of Journalism Ethics. And at the CUNY Journalism School, they told me that they wanted to run a much more vigorous journalism program, reminding me that in New York, CUNY has been the entry for a lot of people into the middle class and beyond. So CUNY journalism has a really great team teaching serious journalism, but in addition, CUNY is responsible for getting a lot of people into the middle class and beyond. And while I went to a different school, that's my history from a family with no money living in a neighborhood seriously full of junkyards. I got through school on the kindness of others and have done well. So that's the CUNY thing. That's the journalism thing. Having my name on the thing is a little awkward since I'm a nerd and that's a little too much attention. But people who are much smarter than me tell me that that acts as a force multiplier, and that having my name on the things means everything else I do gets taken more seriously. So even though awkward, that helps everything I believe in, including pigeon rescue.
Pigeon rescue to journalism. I remember being at the opening event that you had with Dean Sarah Bartlett and Jeff Jarvis and everyone there. It was such a wonderful evening, and to hear you talk about the power of journalism, the power of newspapers, and why you support journalism. You're fighting disinformation. There's so many other projects. We'd only be talking about where you've donated if we started doing that. But it's really important for people to understand the impact that you've had. Here is one of the things that you say on your Craig Newmark Philanthropies webpage, where you say, I'm an old school nerd doing what I can to protect the people who fight to protect the values that America aspires to: fairness, opportunity, and respect. And you retired from Craigslist a few years ago, and there you are on Twitter as well. And by the way, I want to welcome all your supporters on Twitter, your followers on Twitter, as well as at the Newmark School of Journalism. We're on their Twitter feed live, which is exciting. Here are some of the places you've been supporting: the International Women's Media Foundation, among so many other things, including Wikipedia. Here is the Poynter Institute, the Craig Newmark Center for Ethics and Leadership at Poynter, Greenlight Ethics. So many great, great causes. Feel free to jump in. I know you're a modest person, but here you are giving back. Tell us a little bit about the origin story of Craigslist, and also its journey and your journey within it.
Okay. Trying to simplify and leave out a lot of details which may not matter. Basically, in early '95, and I nominally say March 1st, I realized that it was time to give back to the community via the internet. People had helped me settle into San Francisco back then. So I thought I'd start a mailing list telling people about events involving the arts and technology. It spread pretty quickly, word of mouth. We started adding stuff like apartments and jobs. But by the middle of '95, the CC list I was using broke at about 240 addresses. I had to use a list server. And since I'm a nerd and very literal, I wanted to call it San Francisco Events. People around me who were much smarter than me told me they already gave the thing a name. They were calling it Craigslist, and that I had inadvertently created a brand. Then they explained to me what a brand is, and because I seriously didn't know, and they were right. And with the brand tied to my name, it meant I had to take it personally, and I had to follow through in areas like customer service. Because also Mr. and Mrs. Levin in Sunday school told me to treat people like I want to be treated, and that means do my best to provide really good customer service. So I ran the thing as a hobby for a few years, tried running it with volunteers for 1 year in '98, and that failed. And people smarter than me told me I had to make it into a real company. VCs and bankers told me I should do that, and I should do the usual Silicon Valley thing, and they would throw billions of dollars at me. And then I remembered that Mr. and Mrs. Levin told me in Sunday school, knowing enough is enough. Mm-hmm. And I realized I didn't need to make billions. I just wanted to live well, whatever that means for someone. And so that's the reason Craigslist is monetized minimally, So, doing well by doing good is a viable business model. Sometime you'll see some reporting on Craigslist revenue or something like that, but no one ever gets it right, and often it's wildly exaggerated. 99, I was running the company as CEO. Towards the end of 99, I realized that as a manager, I suck. My deal then was to, only took me about a couple months for that to sink in. I made Jim Buckmaster the CEO. I became a customer service rep, not a customer service manager. I stepped down from all management. I had no management influence or anything like that. I was a customer service rep for about 15 years. Jim maintained the philosophy of simplicity, monetizing minimally. And, I kept on doing customer service until two trends converged. First, the team at Craigslist doesn't need me anymore. And I've retired since, which is not surprising since I'll be 70 this year.
Wow.
The other thing is that I kept doing more and more in the philanthropic world. So I left Craigslist, I retired. No one seems to have noticed that I retired. And now I'm doing full-time philanthropy, including customer service for that philanthropy, which means I've been doing customer service for about 40 years. And that's 40 years out of a total of about 70. So, minimal monetization. And that's not altruism. That has to do with Sunday school and the teachers telling me that to know when enough is enough, because once you make enough, whatever that means, then it's much more satisfying to change the world a little.
Well, you've certainly done that, and along the way, you moved from San Francisco. Here you are in New York, and you've told us all the things you're doing here, folks. If you're watching live, tell us how Craigslist affected you. Or did you buy a couch? Did you meet somebody? Did you buy a home, rent an apartment? Tell us on the site. We'll take a look. Craig, what is the lesson for innovation that the media industry can take from what happened with Craigslist and classified ads? And, this was something that newspapers owned. What were the mistakes that the media companies made in that arena and those years that we can now apply to media today? What are the trends the media is missing now that they should be paying attention to, so that the way they lost, classified ads and that kind of revenue, they don't make that mistake again?
Well, I'd say start with the newspapers and others need to start with doing serious research and fact-checking as to what happened in their own industry.
Yep.
Thomas Bechtel, an economist from Sweden, did that about 5 years ago, and he found that newspaper revenue declined starting in the 50s and 60s due to the advent of television news, and they weren't paying attention. So they started losing revenue like crazy, and it's a straight line down from then. This is a big concern for me, because when journalists lose jobs, our country becomes less safe, because a trustworthy press is the immune system of democracy. So I've been paying attention to this, looking at the chart that Thomas put together, and the only dramatic thing that's ever happened to that is that the loss of revenue accelerated greatly around 2008, when Facebook and Google started getting a lot of ads. Now, I've spoken with Thomas and others about the possible role of Craigslist, and because I'm sure that Craigslist must have had some effect, but they tell me that I was flattering myself, that if Craigslist had an effect, they couldn't measure it. So that's a big lesson to learn, like when other people in the industry are, I guess, eating your lunch, find out about it and respond to that. Don't wait 50 years to do it.
Yeah, that's a good lesson for if, anybody who's teaching innovation, we talk about this all the time. You have to be watching what's out there, and you can't be just comfortable. We saw this in the transportation business when airlines came along or airplanes came along. Trains didn't say, the train companies were very comfortable. They could have said, we're not in the train business, we're in the transportation business. Let's see what these brothers are up to down in North Carolina, and let's talk to them, right? They didn't say, they saw the kind of tunnel vision that you see in a lot of industries when it comes to innovation. Tell us about the value of Craigslist in terms of what you were doing and your team in Craigslist that's so different from everywhere else, why we remember and use and still, very successful company, whereas lots of things came in and out during the dot-com period and of course the 2008 crisis.
Well, one of the basic values was listening to the community and doing stuff in response to that. Sometimes it's really hard when one big segment of the community says do things one way, and another segment of the community suggests doing things another way. That's really tough. And now it's Jim's problem. But the fundamental lesson is listen to people in terms of what people need and want. The problem is that sometimes bad actors are really good at, well, as Steve Bannon says, flooding the zone with shit.
Yeah.
And sometimes bad actors can distract you from your mission. But Craigslist history is in not being distracted and sticking with some basic values. Jessica Lingle wrote a book on Craigslist called The People's Internet, pointing out that one big thing about Craigslist is it's one of the few remaining sites that have not been gentrified. And that's the deepest observation I've heard come from anyone. Craigslist is like a neighborhood which is imperfect, but people get along. People of different sorts get along. People get together to do things of mutual benefit. Developers come around with huge bags of money, and we tell them to go away. And that ain't bad. The only comparable site I can think of offhand is Wikipedia, which, as I put it, is where facts go to live. Like Craigslist will help you get through the day, like dumping a sofa or possibly advertising for your small business. Wikipedia is where history is being recorded. So both, to me, the best examples of ungentrified sites on the net.
Tell us about Jim. You mentioned Jim Buckmeister. Talk about how you decide when you're the founder of a company who you hand the mantle over to. And was that a difficult decision? And what about Jim made him the right person?
Okay, it was a difficult decision for me because I was giving up control of my child, realizing that I was not the right guy to keep it running. Fortunately, I'd learned from other people in the dot-com industry that that people who had hung on too long and really screwed things up. Jim, I had hired him to be the lead tech guy. He could do the job. He could make the tough decisions that I sucked at. So he was the natural guy to replace me as a CEO. And again, I made myself a customer service rep. No management responsibility, no management authority, no influence. A part of the agreement was that I would leave Jim alone and focus on customer service. Again, that's been almost all of my adult life. If you figure that my adult life has been now about 50 years, 40 of them customer service.
Amazing. I saw you do this. People, when they heard you were customer service rep, you insisted I list you as that when we interviewed you in 2005 at Columbia.
Yeah.
And very discreetly, you told me that you will be doing customer service on your panel while you'll be listening, but you have to do this because that's your job. And to see someone do that and have that dedication for what a lot of people consider a lower level gig tells you the value of connecting with your customers. So can you talk a little bit about what are things you learned as a customer service rep that you didn't learn as a founder, CEO, big cheese?
Well, I just have always kept committed to the grassroots. This has to do with my realization that any success I've had over the last 20, 30 years has been that I've accidentally been in the right time and the right place. That makes me the Forrest Gump of the internet. More recently, in the last 10 years, I've reflected that I grew up in a neighborhood with junkyards, with commercial truck repair, that kind of stuff. And growing up with a family with no money, now I thought it was normal that everyone lived in a neighborhood with junkyards, unless you were rich, and that set my attitudes in place. I realized recently that what this all means is that I'm a peasant, and that reflects my taste in food, cars, and so on. Now and then my wife can help me elevate my tastes because she's smarter than I am and better trained in such matters, but I'm a peasant, and that influences a great deal of how I think of myself and what I do. For example, you'll notice in my background there's a banner for Wikipedia, but you'll also see a bobblehead for Rabbi Christofferson's son. That's Krusty the Clown from Simpsons. Although I identify not with Krusty or Homer or Bart, now I identify with Grandpa Simpson.
Oh yeah, your birthday is coming up later this year. You said you'll be 70 years old. It's hard to believe because I've seen you in person, and your age is just a number clearly in how you behave.
Well, I figure I only have a few good years left. This is my farewell tour, and I got to make got to take advantage of that in a way that's really effective. Hence operations like all this work on disinformation, forthcoming announcements on cybersecurity. And as you noticed before, I am funding efforts to counter harassment online, first focusing on countering harassment directed against women journalists who get the worst of it. Now, I'm involved to the extent of finding people who are good at doing it, again, sharing money and influence with them, but otherwise getting out of their way. And that seems to be working. I'm impatient, so I want the effort to be successful right away. But those things have to move slow because it's really scary out there. And sometimes the harassment directed against women journalists, particularly Maria Ressa, is really, really brutal.
Yeah, Maria, awesome woman who, of course, won the Nobel Prize this past year. I was in Oslo to cover the ceremony and her speech, and Dmitri's speech, who was the other co-winner from Russia. Of course, with everything going on there, is very, very important to hear and understand what they're talking about. I want to just read some of the comments that are coming in because so many great people watching. Ariana is in Charlottesville, Virginia, running out the door, but I want to thank you both for all your work in the area of journalism and ethics. Pradnya, who's been a former guest on this show, says, love this so much. Philanthropy matters. Ken is talking about the blurring the line between editorial and reporting, which bothers him. Vanita says, commercialization of media is a fundamental conflict with an objective and free press. So many folks talking. Here is Miriam saying that Brent, the journalist killed in Ukraine, was a film and journalism student at CCNY, which is part of the City University of New York. Vinita says, love old school nerd in this space. And Carla's talking about the IWWF has a wonderful program called Round Earth Media that sends reporters around the world. And Ellen's watching from the Upper East Side. And Debbie says, thank you for this interview, highlighting the positive aspects of Craigslist. Doing well by doing good. People are liking that. And so many great other comments coming in. Naomi says, love the original missed connections on Craigslist. And so many other great stories coming in, folks. Thank you. Tell us about your Sunday. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us your thoughts on the news, on Ukraine, on the pandemic. ask Craig a question. We have about 50 minutes with Craig, so we're going to get a lot of things in. We're going to look at the paper. If you've just joined us, for the last 6.5 years, we've been reading the Sunday print New York Times out loud on Sunday on all these platforms. And I have learned so much doing it with great guests like Craig and others. We have guests sometimes from the Times and other places, and of course, other newspapers as well. So please go to our YouTube channel or go to digimentors.group and look for the New York Times Read Along button. There you'll see our archive of these great interviews. Harlan Coben, the great writer who was a guest on the show a couple of years ago, has the #1 new book as well. He just dropped another book. I don't know how he does it, but he was a guest, and you can see that interview as well. As we go along here, there's so much to talk about. You support not just these media and information channels, Craig, you also support veterans, you support teachers. Talk about those two particular elements of society that are so important. We've heard you reference your teachers multiple times in this conversation already.
Okay. Well, I do support our writers in a big way, particularly through PEN America. And I'm mentioning that so I have an excuse to mention that I've met Harlan Coben. So did my mother before she passed. He was very kind to her, which meant a great deal to her. But the deal also is that for veterans, veterans and their families sacrifice a lot to protect the country. And I take it personally, they do a lot to protect me. So frankly, it pisses me off when, Veterans Affairs and DOD don't pay enough attention to make sure that veterans and their families didn't get enough to eat during the worst of the pandemic. So I put a lot into that and support vets and their families in a bunch of other ways. The most pertinent of which is right now is through Vets in Tech. I'm subsidizing the training of vets and spouses for careers in cybersecurity. The major groups I support are the Bob Woodruff Foundation, which maintains the Got Your Six network, which helps vets throughout the country. The Got Your Six reference simply says that if you're a soldier or Marine on the ground, what you're looking ahead of you is the 12 o'clock position. 6 o'clock is as your back, and you really need someone to have your six right there. I also support Blue Star families in big ways, and the focus is on real things that could help vets. Teachers. Teachers are vital to our national prosperity and national security. And I stumbled onto Donors Choose some years ago. It's pretty simple. If you're a teacher, you put up a classroom project and people can help fund it $1 or $20 at a time. And the deal there is that most teachers aren't paid. Well, most school districts don't fund things well, like getting enough pens and paper for their teachers or stuff like that. As that article shows from the Times, most teachers in the country, the vast majority, have to buy school supplies out of their own salaries, which are inadequate from the beginning. And that's potentially a national security crisis right there. So Donors Choose helps teachers in real ways. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that I do a lot of retweeting of teachers' projects. I hope that doesn't scare folks away. But the deal there with Donors Choose is that what happens is that when there's a big matching grant program, the volume of teachers citing my Twitter, where I have to retweet people, is huge. And those are difficult days for me because my workload is doubled or tripled. But Donors Choose is a great program for teachers. And if you really want to help out teachers, this is the way to do it.
Well, first of all, thank you for everything you do for all these different groups of people. I do want to ask you, Craig, the fact that in this country, teachers, 94% of them have to buy their own teacher supplies, their teaching supplies. The fact that we are in a position where students and teachers have to ask for money like this. What does that say about this country? And why are we in this situation that veterans who we owe them so much, we're not supporting, we're not feeding them properly, teachers are not being supported properly? What can we do at this juncture?
Well, the deal is we need to put pressure on politicians who are good actors, reminding them that national prosperity and national security relies on teachers being rewarded for the really tough jobs they do. I've done a tiny amount of teaching, and I'm just not tough enough to do it, not persistent enough to do it. So one thing we can do straight away is fund classrooms at adequate levels, at all levels in the country. Also, frankly, the whole deal with higher education, the idea with higher education is a little bit elitist, sometimes inappropriately so. And I'm trying to deal with that when it comes to cybersecurity, because in the industry, people are beginning to say that maybe you don't need a college education in some fields. You just need a lot of good training and on-the-job experience. And so that's a major issue in cybersecurity training right now, because there are 400,000 to 500,000 open career positions in this country in cybersecurity. This is one reason I'm supporting training even at the high school level with Girls Who Code and the Girl Scouts, because if you have a really good background in the area and a company is willing to take you on as an intern, then there's something possibly good there. A neighbor of mine just got her first 3 cybersecurity merit badges as a Girl Scout. And I spoke with Chris Inglis about this, who's the National Cybersecurity Director, and I've suggested an internship for her, because as he points out, that if you're in high school or if you're a 7-year-old, then you could probably get a security clearance pretty easily, since you don't have any skeletons in your closet that young. So I will be briefing him on this during a meeting which is coming up next week.
Craig, I don't know how you keep up with all of the philanthropy you're doing. I know you push for change and quick action. Let's tell people how they can apply. On your Newmark Philanthropy's website, you have a big apply page, a big button. People can hit apply, and they can apply to participate, to ask you for a grant, and you talk about the various things you support: trustworthy journalism, information ecosystem, voter protection, women in technology, vets and military families. So anybody who's watching, if you are interested, you can go on to the site and apply. What is a typical process? And of course, you can't support everybody, but how do you decide what to support?
Well, backing up a little bit to give Mabel, my financial person, credit, she designed this process, which is as streamlined as possible, because you do have to collect some information to keep the IRS happy. But this is a pretty streamlined, simple process. I just want to ask everyone that when you fill in the application form, please remember to sign it, because that's something people forget to do. But look at the kind of things that I'm supporting. Please make sure that what you're talking is a good fit for what's going on, and then accumulate the information you need, like your determination letter from the IRS and the relevant stuff from your state. As Mabel discovered, the easiest way to do it sometimes is to do screenshots of things after you look up your stuff, and just send that all in. And frankly, I'll be the primary person looking at all that, even though, as philanthropy goes, I'm an amateur. Mm-hmm. And then when professional philanthropy people hear me talk about my process, they cringe, or should. But since this process is streamlined, we can approve projects much faster than most foundations. I'm winging it, and my deal is that I want to give away at least half of my net worth. I've already done that, but now and then I get a little more. But I'm giving away far in excess of my of half of my net worth, and I want to have that done by the time I conclude my farewell tour.
Well, we're many years from that, Craig. Let me ask you before we get to the paper about the news yesterday that President Biden will be taxing the richest Americans more. And what are your thoughts on that, and the distinction and the difference between philanthropy and taxation and the roles that they play?
Well, I do think it's a good idea, because financial instruments like the really rich people use, they manage to avoid paying a lot of taxes and pay way under 20%. Me, I think I'm paying about 23%. The numbers change, but since I'm giving away half of what I'm getting anyway, from my point of view, at least for public service, my effective tax rate is like 73%. And again, that's based on what I learned in Sunday school. Knowing enough is enough. This is not virtuous. It's not altruistic. It's basically, it's basically what I learned from Mr. and Mrs. Levin in Sunday school, maybe reinforced by the notion that I am the Forrest Gump of the internet, and I'm a peasant. I don't know what I can do with a lot of money. I mean, I buy all the books that I want to. I don't buy all the gadgets that I want to, although I may overindulge in any case. So some things I'm free with, but what's the point of having a lot of cars or private jets or whatever? I don't get it.
Well, thank you, Craig, and thank you for all you do. Let's get to the paper. Let's talk about the New York Times and your journalism habits. 1 second. David says, Biden can't tax anyone. Only Congress has the power to tax. Biden is proposing that Congress do this. So thank you, David. Please go back and watch our discussion with David K. Johnston, the premier tax expert, the premier Donald Trump avoidance of taxes expert in the world. Great New York Times reporter. He runs DC Reports. You got to check that out. And you can find all of that in our if you go to digimentors.group, you can look for the New York Times read along. So tell us about newspapers, news, and your interest in the Times itself.
The Times is one of the best newspapers in the world, and I subscribe to it. I read a fair amount of it. Sometimes there are issues, for example, in the reporting of the Supreme Court Justice Ketanji. Sometimes, let's say, they report on some senators attacking her, and the Times neglects to point out that some of the senators involved are disinformation super spreaders. That's a kind way of saying they repeat things like the big lie, and the Times treats them as potentially reliable sources, and they forget to mention that kind of thing. When they talk about anything related to the January 6th insurrection, or as some would call it, a terrorist attack, they talk about people, getting involved with insurrectionists, neglecting to point out that the people doing that kind of stuff are spreading disinformation, knowingly spreading disinformation that hurts the country. When they talk about Putin, well, Putin has never changed. Putin was a member of the KGB. His mission was to hurt our country. And, people no longer call him a communist, but I don't know what changed. It's like, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. The Times doesn't point that out. That's a bit frustrating. The Times used to have something called a public editor, which would point out ethical lapses and things that the Times just didn't get right. They never were too busy, because the Times typically gets things wrong, but they don't have a public editor, which they do need. And right now at Columbia Journalism Review, they're beginning to fulfill that function for the Times and other papers. They're starting to do a really good job. A disclosure, I'm on the CJR board and I'm a funder of what they do. But the thing is that they could use some help. They are getting some help. For example, the newest columnist, I think, is Zeynep Turfetchi, who's the real deal. She does things like fact-checking and actual research. There, I have to disclose that she's the Newmark Chair of Journalism, Ethics, and Security at the Columbia J School. But again, she's the real deal. She does fact-checking, and not all her columnists do fact-checking. And that's something that a public editor could help with. So that Times in any newspaper with high standards does need a public editor, because journalism is hard. Getting the facts right is hard, and sometimes you need a little help.
Thank you, Craig. This story about Putin is fascinating. I look forward to reading it. You wouldn't know this, but I lived as a little boy in the Soviet Union at the height of the empire, the Soviet Empire, and I saw firsthand and remember the way the state terrorized its own people. And he is that same man, and he is not. This is not going to be negotiated away very gently. He is killing innocent people every day. That's why I was so moved by the Arnold Schwarzenegger video the other day, which I thought was very powerful video.
Yeah, the deal is that meet the new boss, same as the old boss. They don't call themselves communists anymore, but I don't know the real difference besides the rhetoric.
Yes.
And that's why it's disturbing when American politicians repeat Russian talking points.
Yes, that's one of the problems that we have seen for sure. Here's what to know about cryptocurrency and taxes. Are you into crypto, NFTs, things like that?
Surprisingly enough, I'm not, because I love the spirit of it, because it's played a role in science fiction, that kind of thing, for decades. And my deal is, well, the science fiction is the literature of my people, nerds. I read a great deal of it, and the spirit of crypto is in there. People finding new ways of doing things, liberating ways of doing things, but how this is all working out is unclear. I should dive into it, but if I'm doing that, then I can't dive into cybersecurity. I won't have the time.
Got it. Here's a headline from history. 1991, Bronx Hospital gives gay couples spousal benefits. The Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx became the largest private employer to provide this. And this is an element of progress in this country, right? In 91, this happens. And then in 2015, same-sex marriages become legal in the United States. I'm a believer that the arc of justice, the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. You are doing your part to make that happen. Are you an optimistic person or a pessimist?
I'm very much an optimist. Sometimes it's a struggle to maintain my optimism. That's why I asked, journalists with high knowledge of journalism ethics, what has the press learned from 2016? How are we doing? And their answers didn't encourage me to remain optimistic, but I'm stubborn.
Glad to hear you're still stubborn. Here's an ad for Rolex. The only reason I'm showing it is because it's Oscar Sunday tonight. Have you caught any of the Oscar nominees?
I guess I'm not that much interested. I'm more of a TV guy. I love TV. I love watching a long form TV. So yesterday I was watching the new season of Bridgerton, because I have a fondness for that kind of thing. And I was watching the last season of The Last Kingdom, based on the Saxon Chronicles, which is a fairly realistic telling of the history of the wars between the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes and Vikings in the about 1,000 years ago. But I do love TV. I also consistently watch Simpsons, Family Guy, Billions is great, Super Pumped is great. I'm a TV guy.
Good. It certainly sounds like it. Rising Mideast prices threaten to make for a paltry Ramadan table. Here is The Vanishing Nomads of Northern India, The World Through a Lens. Let's keep going here. Edge of Kiev, signs of Ukraine's persistent counterattacks, and lots of coverage of Ukraine and what's happening with President Biden's trip out there. Here's more on Putin. I think everyone should read this very serious look at his 22-year career. He started off by saying Russia is a friendly European nation, and now we can't imagine anything being further from the truth. At summit, Israel's ties with Arabs move from ceremony to substance. A comment on that: I'm going to be in Dubai towards next week to visit my brother. That's where I would have met Ron Thomas, who is watching from New Jersey. He's actually comes to us every week from Dubai, but seems like I will miss him. Sorry, I'm just trying to adjust the paper here. And so I just want to do a shout out to Ron. One of the things, Craig, that they've changed in the UAE is their weekend used to be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was a working day. And they have flipped it in part to fit into the larger business world.
My concern in the articles is that the ones regarding the war in Ukraine don't emphasize enough that a lot of the world's wheat comes from Ukraine or Russia, and that's going to create unexpected problems. The future is coming at us much faster than we had suspected. This is the kind of thing predicted by Neil Stephenson, William Gibson, and others. And the future is accelerating.
And William Gibson's the one who coined the term cyberspace. Am I remembering my nerd history?
He did. I sometimes think he wish he didn't. But also Neil Stephenson coined the word metaverse in an excellent novel, Snow Crash, and he doesn't seem to regret it that much. But the deal is that people like me have been waiting for this stuff for 30 or more years, because the science fiction about this came out 30 to 35 years ago. And in the later years of my farewell tour, I might have to slap goggles on and just lie in bed and do nothing but be in the virtual world.
Can't wait to hear about those adventures. Here's an article about streaming studios storming the Oscars. And just a word here about Ginny Thomas. And she's the wife of Clarence Thomas, and we can't hold spouses responsible for the actions of their spouses. But in this case, there are texts where she says, I've shared this information with my best friend. And in multiple places, they have talked about how they're each other's best friends. And he was the only justice, even in this crazy, 6-2 Supreme Court right now. There'll be, this particular Supreme Court. He was the only one who dissented and didn't recuse himself, of course, when he should have. So we are hoping that when the new justice is confirmed, we'll have at least a 6-3 Supreme Court, which should, I believe, the right number should always be 5-4. But here we are. Adding hitman to a criminal resume, and Arizona first to offer driver's licenses on iPhones. Other states want to be next. I think this is exciting because it's very easy to lose your license, but you're going to hold on to your phone as long as you can.
Well, rewinding a little bit, the coverage in the Times might point out that what the Thomases are doing, everything they do, aligns itself much better with Russian interests than American interests. Regarding the ability to put your driver's license on a phone, I love the idea of that a lot, because I'd prefer to carry a phone and not a wallet, and I've moved in that direction. This has implications, though, for digital identity online, because at some point, we might have online the digital equivalent of a driver's license, which proves we are who we say we are, And that could be a big deal online, because perhaps when you're on a social media site of the future, you may be anonymous to customers or users of the site, but to the people who run the site, you may have had to supply your digital driver's license proving you are who you say you are. So if you harass people, they know who you are. Or if you're a troll from overseas or acting as a disinformation proxy, then they could determine that and then just stop you from doing that, because it will be not that challenging to come up with a fake driver's license in the US. People do that, but each one is expensive. It's not like generating a new, fresh email address in order to spam people. Now, of course, people might be less willing to approve the use of a driver's license coming out of the Moscow DMV, but I would trust a driver's license coming out of the New York DMV or the US Postal Service. But when it comes to online proof of identity, there are unintended consequences, and people like Dana Boyd are much better at figuring those out than I am.
Thank you, Craig. I want to just point out some of the comments coming in. Here's Michael saying, love this. I'm relying on Craigslist so much right now too. Craig is great. So love seeing that. Folks, anybody who's watching right now, please hit retweet, share, like, tag a friend somewhere in the world who would enjoy this conversation. As soon as we're off the air, it will rerun on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and on our digimentors.group website. So if you share the link, it will be useful for months and years to come. So tag a friend, they can watch live or watch later. We're about 20 minutes left with Craig. And I did see that Ron Thomas, who I said was based in Dubai, is now in New Jersey for a bit. He said his first ad that he ever bought for his business was on Craigslist. And he loves Craigslist. So that's great to hear. We're going to continue with the paper. And here is a Dirk Halstead obituary, photojournalist who captured world-changing events. He has died. Here he is at the Reagan assassination attempt outside the Hilton Hotel in 1981. I remember watching this very carefully as an 11-year-old. Here are his photographs from Vietnam. He did so much great work, and somebody who will be remembered, whose work will live on. And here's Taylor Hawkins, charismatic drummer for Foo Fighters, is dead at 50. I want to be the biggest band in the world, he said. And of course, they have been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Dave Grohl is somebody whose name many of you will know. What kind of music do you listen to, Craig?
Well, first, I'm grateful for the Foo Fighters keeping up the fight against Foo, but it takes a toll. And I've stolen a joke from Dave Letterman there. My musical tastes largely revolve around my rabbi, Leonard Cohen, who isn't doing much performing these days, but he wrote my mission statement, which is contained in the last stanza of his song or prayer, Democracy. It begins, I'm sentimental, if you know what I mean. And so he dictated, in a way, a lot of my politics.
Fascinating. Here is the Sunday Style section. We're just going to flip through a few of the sections. Please jump in as things catch your eye or anything you'd like to talk about. The Style section, we know, is printed on better paper because they have, fancy ads in here, and they also have the Modern Love column. If you haven't seen it, folks, last year on Valentine's Day, we interviewed Daniel Jones, the editor of Modern Love, and he told great stories, including how to get selected for the Modern Love column. So please find that in digimentors.group. Look for the New York Times Read Along or look on our YouTube playlist. A stylist has fun with her clientele. It's about Rebecca Grice. It's a dog's life if you want it. All those pandemic puppies aren't going to start taking care of themselves.
And it's by Glynis, who I know a little bit. I do love dogs. I normally carry around dog treats with me. and I need to get to know more dogs in my neighborhood.
Our dog just came back from being walked by Rupa, and she always knows that we have the read along on Sunday morning. We have the social cues column. This is the etiquette column, Craig, and you have said multiple times you are an awkward person, you're a nerd, so you may not be the right person to ask an etiquette question to, but I'm going to pose this here, and there are no right or wrong answers. I'm putting you on the spot. So only for a night. Our house has an adjoining one-bedroom apartment. We use it only for relatives. We're not interested in renting it. A friend asked if her parents could use the apartment for one night under very sympathetic circumstances. We agreed. A few weeks later, she asked if his parents could use it for a week, even though she has a guest room and there are Airbnbs in the area. I politely refused. Now I feel used. Am I wrong? What is your answer, Craig? And again, no right or wrong answer.
If you're asking me, to refuse politely is good. To feel used is thinking about it too much. But the title of that column, I think, is Get Off My Lawn. And as a man now of advanced years, I have been practicing uses. So much like Grandpa Simpson, I've started yelling angrily at clouds. But that is an inside Simpsons joke.
Yes, but we are familiar with that. And here is Scene City, which is the way that they used to do. This is what Bill Cunningham used to run, the photographs of galas and things. And here, South Asians gather to celebrate their achievements in entertainment this year. This is from a South Asian Excellence in Film party, again, ahead of the Oscars. And you're seeing interesting folks here, including Riz Ahmed, Purna Jagannathan, and others. So this looks really cool. There's Aziz Ansari, Priyanka Chopra, and an ad from Netflix. I don't think I've seen a full-page ad written like this. And you know some of these shows, so you might know what this is about. This is from Bridgerton, I presume, right?
This is in Bridgerton. A major plot item is the Lady Thistledown's newsletter, her blog, and it's very smartly done. It's all very clever, and I have a taste for this kind of thing, which my wife doesn't understand at all. So you're sometimes shocked at what I really love. On the other hand, I'm shocked that she loves Last Kingdom. I'm shocked that she loves Vikings and Vikings Valhalla, and for that matter, South Park. So sometimes people surprise you, but I do really love Bridgerton, and I know who Eloise Bridgerton is, and I'm hoping she's going to find love with that printer guy. Oops, I'm saying too much. And I'm enjoying her spirited half-sister, Kate.
Very nice. And it says Miss Edwina Sharma, newly arrived from India. I like to see that.
Sree, I jumped in just to add, I was really interested in the fact that this ad that you see, this full-page ad for the Washington Post today, they wrapped it around the front page. They don't cover the whole front page. They cover just like the first, two columns or so. But it's an interesting play by Netflix.
Yeah, this is the day to do it, right, Neil?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's
absolutely.
Right to do it.
And,
okay,
and Craig, I'm a big fan of The Last Kingdom as well.
That's good.
I'm glad I'm in good company.
Donate here to solve a murder. Philanthropists look to fund police searches of DNA databases. That seems interesting. Can you remind us how, or have you announced what you're doing in cybersecurity yet? And if I know a veteran, how can I get them to apply or participate or benefit from the training you're offering?
Well, the cybersecurity announcements, there's a new batch coming soon. In the past, I've heavily contributed to, among other places, Consumer Reports. Because the deal is that Consumer Reports has started evaluating internet-connected products for their security and privacy. This is a big deal. For example, you want it to be difficult for a hacker to get into your baby cam. And you want the security of your internet-connected car tested because you don't want your car to be suddenly stopped by a hacker on the freeway. And you don't want your self-driving car to be hacked to self-drive you off a cliff. On the vet side, if you're interested in that kind of training, not only cybersecurity, but check out a group called Vets in Tech. That's Vets in Tech. So far, we've trained about 900 vets and their spouses and placed over 90% of them either in new jobs or we've upskilled them so they get to keep their jobs, because some companies are insisting that their IT people know enough about cybersecurity to be to help keep people safe.
Thank you. And so everyone check out Vets in Tech. They've got a very dramatic name for a conference, right? It's called Invasion Conference or something. I was struck by that. Vets in Tech Invasion National Convention.
We may have a sense of humor.
Can you, one of the news items, speaking of philanthropists, Craig, we saw this week is that Mrs. Steve Jobs, Lorraine Powell Jobs, has donated huge amount to Habitat for Humanity. She's also famous for secretly just donating money, not secretly, but like unannounced, non-applications giving money. It's a different philosophy from yours. What do you think of her work and what she's been doing?
It's actually much closer to being the same. We don't do the usual philanthropic operations. We try to find what's out there that actually gets stuff done and is consistent with what our beliefs in. Sometimes we proactively approach them, and we get advice from people who know these areas. The deal is that for the most part, I ask the people who receive money to talk about what they're doing publicly because, well, one reason is that if you don't tell people what you're doing, if people don't know what you're doing, then your effectiveness is dramatically reduced. I also insist that they get good at communications, because what I learned from Valerie Jarrett in 2009, when she dragged me into the West Wing, she said, doing the right thing doesn't matter unless you can talk about it effectively. First, you got to get the word out about what you're doing. Also, the more you talk about what you're doing, that's a force multiplier for other people working in the same area. But most importantly, if you're doing something good and getting traction at it, that will bait nonprofits or bad actors in that space who are running scams or worse. So you have to be able to protect yourself, because if you can't protect yourself, you will be attacked, and it gets really dirty and nasty out there. So talking about what you do gets the word out for various entities, and that helps in a big way. I observed that she more heavily funded the two main vets groups that I support, Bob Woodruff Foundation and Blue Star Families. And she has a lot of money to give away. And I really, really appreciate what she's done, because Blue Star Families and the Bob Woodruff Foundation are doing a great deal to support vets and their families across the country. We need to remember that we owe an awful lot to vets, and we owe an awful lot to their families who sacrifice a lot and sometimes don't get treated well enough. For example, we need to get federal help for spouses who, when they're transferred to a different base in a different city, a different state, they may have to reapply for their licenses, whatever they're doing, like law, and that means that they lose income for months. And the active service members are not paid a lot. So if the spouse loses income, they're kind of screwed.
Just want to point out, Patricia says that Craig's quotes would make a best-selling book. And I want to say I screwed up. I said Lorraine Jobs instead of Mackenzie Scott. I got the two very important women who are doing very important work mixed up. My mistake. I apologize. Mackenzie Scott donated more than $400 million this week to Habitat for Humanity and has been doing those wonderful gifts.
They're both doing a lot of good stuff in some overlapping areas. So I confuse them routinely, and I've given up trying to deconflate them. It's worse when I talk about the good work Pura Omidyar does. He has a whole family of foundations, and I can never remember which one I'm working with at any given time. I've just given up on that.
Therese says, thank you, Craig, for your dedication to democracy and a free press. We won't have time to look at the magazine, but just want to show you this cover story, Citizens of Kiev, written by C.J. Chivers, former student at Columbia Journalism School, former Marine, and photographs by Alexander Chekmanev. So everyone should check that out. We are going to wrap up our conversation with Craig, but want to hear about your work Neil's pointing out that we should at least glance at the New York Times for Kids. The full PDF is on our website until noon Eastern today. So everybody, please go to digimentors.group. You can grab the PDF from our website. We're very grateful to the Times for helping us do that. This is the secrets issue. So if you have a kid under 12, 13, they will enjoy this. There's lots to read, very accessible content. Reminds me of a lot of things I got to see when I was a kid, not easily accessible now in print, but so useful, so much fun. So everyone should check this out. And I think that's pretty cool. So please go to digimentors.group. You can also see our entire archive there of great interviews with various folks that we've been describing throughout this. Craig, can you talk a little bit about misinformation and disinformation and your support of folks who are fighting that? Because I think that's so important in this world. I will say, Craig, that I believe part of the reason we are now in the third year of a pandemic is because of misinformation, disinformation at all the levels. And of course, one of the reasons there's a war in Ukraine is that a world leader is convinced part of his military and his people that a democratically elected Jewish man who lost uncles in the war to Nazis is a Nazi himself. It is so unacceptable at every level.
Well, the guy who gives best context to this, whose work I normally don't understand, is Marshall McLuhan. 50 years ago, he said that World War III is a guerrilla information war fought without distinction between civilian and military participants. The Russians were trying to weaken our country then by coming up with clever lies, basically, disinformation, trying to weaken us. And in 2013, they published stuff saying that they feel they are at war with us and they seek to weaken us by publishing disinformation and would attempt to corrupt the election of 2016 and put into the US assets who would weaken our country dramatically. And as a result, the Obama administration left in place within the National Security Council a reasonably good team prepared to fight a pandemic as soon as it was detected. For example, they would have detected it, let's say, in December of 2019. But in the first years of the prior administration, the team built to respond to a pandemic was basically disbanded. Many of them were fired. Not all of them were fired. There's a slight error in some of the reporting then, but many of them were fired. As a result, we lost maybe 3 months in response to the pandemic. And I speak to statisticians and network epidemiologists, and they say the vast majority of deaths suffered in the US could have been prevented by a fast response to the pandemic. In addition, a lot of the roles that in the US in terms of fighting cyber attacks at the White House level, roles like the National Cyber Director were left absent, and people serious about fighting the Russians were fired or sidelined, like Lisa Monaco. And as a result, we were less prepared to fight our foreign adversaries, whether the Russians or North Koreans or the Iranians or so on. I see someone much more attractive than me in that screen capture. She thinks she's married to me, and by coincidence she is, although I don't think she can hear me from here.
Folks, we're watching the last few minutes of our conversation with Craig Newmark. Here's what we're going to do. I have one more question from the audience that I'm going to ask him. Then we're going to take him off camera, do some housekeeping, and then he's going to come back and give us a pro tip that will help anybody who's thinking about journalism, media, writing, etc. So the question's from Randall, who says, I'd like to hear your thoughts on both sidesisms in journalism today.
Well, trying to do this quickly, a big step in journalism 100 years ago was objectivity, and in which sense you show both sides of an argument. But in many cases, one side of the argument, they're speaking honestly to you. On a different side of argument, they're lying to you. And if you know they're going to lie to you, then don't give them a chance to lie to you, or do something to debunk the lies in a serious way. But if you present both sides, and if you're presenting one side that's a lie, you're breaching trust with the audience.
Thank you. That's so well put. So I'm going to ask Neil to come back on, and we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to come right back to you, Craig, and then we'll be done. We also want to tell you that New York Times Kids issue, we're going to have the editor, Amber Williams, with us in June. Neil, we're just having such a great time with these shows. I had so much fun talking to Craig, and we're not done yet.
Absolutely. This was another great show. Big shout out to Carla Barnakis for helping to put this together and get Craig. And of course, Sree, you had interviewed him for Social Media Weekend several years ago as well. I just want to say on a personal note, I meet with all our guests before we go live, do the prep session, research what we're going to talk about. Craig couldn't have been the nicest of guys that I got to work with in terms of being generous with his time, being generous with content, helping us figure out, letting us go live on his Twitter account of all things. Just a tremendous. And then to look, one of the things that's important to note is that we're not affiliated with the New York Times officially. We have a very close relationship with them. We work very closely with Tom Jolly, the print editor, Wayne Camadoy, the art director. They're always great about feeding information to us, putting in touch with people. But we have that separation from the Times, so we can be critical when we need to. And when we're talking about both sidesism, when we're talking about coverage, when we're talking about the editorial from last week, where they talked about cancel culture, they should have talked about disinformation. They should have talked about both sidesism. So that's what's great to be able to have Craig on a show like this. So we can, we love the Times, we love the print edition, but that also puts us in position to be critical when we need to.
And we also want to say that this is not a show just about the Times. It's about news, information, accurate media portrayals of what's going on in the world. We do this with other newspapers. So if you're at a newspaper that would like to be part of the read along, just let us know and we'll bring you on. We've had the Chicago Sun-Times, the Globe and Mail from Toronto, the Washington Post multiple times. We've also done the Khaleej Times out in Dubai. So lots of things going on. Back to you, Neil.
Absolutely. And we're hoping to do the Philadelphia Inquirer coming up. Mike Sealski will be our guest in coming weeks. We might also be able to do the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So we definitely are looking forward to that. So just some quick announcements before we bring Craig back on. Next week's guest, before we do that, Sree, we'll talk about our production team real quick.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Thank you, Paula, Steve, Carla, and Julia. This show is like almost not like any Zoom call you watch. You've seen the production, the efforts that are put in by this team. It's part of Digimentors. We do this for organizations big and small all over the world. If you have a conference, a webcast, anything you want, a podcast that you'd like to build, talk to us. We also do consulting, and we're very grateful for everybody's support as we do this. And big thanks to our friends at Muckrack for being sponsors of the show. That's how we can do this on every Sunday for 6.5 years. We're hitting the 6.5 year mark. And the Local Connection, which is the newsletter that Carla writes. Every journalist should be reading this, subscribing to this, how to take big national stories and make them local, how to get local story ideas. Really well done. Go to bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips, all lowercase. You will love subscribing to that. So thank you for all the work you do, Carla.
And of course, that's put out by the Center for Cooperative Media. Next week, I'll be stepping in as guest host. Brian Miller will be our guest. He is a former New
Wow.
York Times restaurant critic and author of Dining in the Dark, a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and triumph over depression. That certainly will be a very interesting discussion. We hope you'll join us again. We are live every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, interviewing special guests, talking about the New York Times and other papers, as Sree mentioned. So we'll bring Craig back on, and before we have him share his final words, we want to share some of the comments that came out, because people really did love the show. Ron Thomas, the show is educational. I call it the Sunday morning learning zone. My mom liked your work. Giving to people is a virtue. You're a great motivating source. So thank you for that. Pradnya Haldapur says, great show. Naomi, you give off heavy mensch vibes, Craig. Heavy mensch vibes. Miriam, Craig is very smart and speaks his mind. Jonathan says, great show, interesting guest. Thank you. So with that as a lead-in, Craig, your final thoughts.
Journalism is a big deal, and we need good journalism to save our country, basically. It's a very tough job. I appreciate people who go into it. Do remember to fact check a great deal. And remember that the more you stand up for the country, the more you make yourself a target for people who might be working with our adversaries, foreign and domestic. So be prepared to protect yourself. It's scary out there.
And then, Craig, a pro tip for journalists?
Well, that was it. Fact check a lot and be prepared to protect yourself. Get ready for the unexpected.
That's great. I actually thought that was a tip for all of us in general. So we'll take it. We'll take all of it. Craig, thank you so much for joining us. Again, we definitely want to acknowledge all the great work that you're doing through Craig Newmark Philanthropies, and people can learn more about it.
And fighting for fairness, opportunity, respect. I love those three ideas. And following him on Craig's at Craig Newmark, please do check out what they're doing. And he's pointing out that he's retired. If you missed this part of the show where he talks about how to apply, you can rewind as soon as we're off the air here. All of these shows will run right again on all our platforms, as well as digimentors.group. Look for that read along button and you can watch this all again. We are so grateful to you, Craig, and for everybody who's watching. Thank you for your support. We love that we were able to do this. Craig, thank you. Have a great Sunday.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for everything, guys.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.